Welcome to Sankofa Summer School. Why is this so loud? Okay. Welcome to Sankofa Summer School. We are so happy to have you here. I'm very, very, very excited for tonight's class. I got to have a preview because I'm the executive director. Yay! But I think you're going to be extremely excited for what we are doing today. I'm going to bring a very young, brilliant, talented woman who is just taking social media by storm. She creates incredible content and is really educating people out here about some really positive things so that and also some things that we just need to know. And so when she, checked in with Sankofa Summer School and talked about what she wanted to do, I had all the confidence that she'd be able to do that. But I'm going to read her bio and you're going to learn a little bit more about this brilliant person we have at come today. Abiola Agoro, their pronouns, she and they, is a disabled queer Black woman educator, a visual artist, strategist, organizer, and fashion designer. Very fashionable, I have to say. As a lifelong conduit of information, Abiola has led with non-traditional approaches to education and visual arts since childhood, teaching full classes on advocacy to adults at the age of 13 and opening up her own clothing store at the age of 15. With accolades and features across education and the visual arts from the NAACP, Nike, Women's Health Mag, and more, Abiola continues to seek to harmonize the ever-evolving digital age with the decommissioning of institutional structures across the industry. We love that. Currently, Abiola leads a social media following of 132,000 plus, engaging her audience on racial justice, mental health advocacy, disability advocacy, and joy. In a world that often denies Black women invisibility, Abiola uses the philosophical framework of living a life in the sun to ground all of her work in transparency, truth, liberation, discomfort, and radical love. Let me tell you something, okay? This generation, they got it. They're getting it, and we love it, and we're so excited for this. So today, she's going to be doing a class that, we were kind of workshopping it a bit, and when she told me about this other work that she does, I was like, we need this here. So Beyond King Leopold's Ghost, Deconstructing Systematic Racism against the Congolese people. I'm going to pull this good person to the stage. We have got slides going on. We got everything happening. Let me get us in the right place that we need to be. All right, there we go. I'm going to pass it over to you. You please take over, and we are here to learn. All right, take care.
Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. And I'm always kind of just honored, enthralled, just deeply excited at the idea, not only to teach people, but to be able to do it alongside of and for people and organizations that I have literally just been in love with for such a long time. Dr. Taylor has been such a phenomenal influence on my work, so I'm really honored to be able to do this, and thank you so much for that introduction. So folks, as she stated, this class is called Deconstructing Systematic Racism Against the Congolese People. And before we do anything, something that I really like to emphasize is on this first slide, so much whenever we talk about the Congolese people, whenever we hear about the Congolese people and the different aspects that they've been through when it comes to this continued systemic harm by Western powers, we don't really stop and look at the culture. And this picture just captured me. It was I need for this to be, before we talk about anything else, I need to be able to look at this beautiful woman who is from the Congo. I believe this picture was taken around 1910, they believe, just looking fierce and beautiful, and look at that culture before we do anything else. So I wanted to set the stage for that, and now we will move forward. Now, for my opening statement, I would like to talk a little bit about the fact that this class is not going to be easy. It's something that I think is really important when you're trying to do this work, but it can feel painful at times. I was telling Dr. Taylor when I first was looking at doing this that making a video on Congo made me cry, because when I was younger, Congo touched my heart in one of the deepest ways possible. I grew up in a lot of circumstances where I was forced to deal with racism a lot, where I was forced to consistently kind of look at things in this way and format. And because of that, I was used to talking about certain topics, but Congo still just it can bring me to tears very easily. And so I wanted to add that as an opening statement before we do anything else. Now, you already got a little bit of an introduction for me, of me from Dr. Taylor, but I wanted to also add that because I am an educator at heart, my kind of rules of engagement when it comes to any of this are asking questions whenever you need to. So if you think you have a question about something, feel free to send it in the chat. If I know I'm going to address it, I'll wait and answer it. But coming from somebody who has ADHD and like all of the things when trying to focus, I'd much rather you ask it and have it pop up so that it gets to be put out there instead of waiting and it doesn't get addressed. So that's kind of my part of my rules of engagement. And then before we get started, I wanted to read the definition of Afrocentricity. Now, of course, this is called SankofaSummerSchool. If you're not familiar, Sankofa is like one of the most important aspects, I think, from all African culture that we talk about in a United States setting. But the term Afrocentricity is really what guides the work that they do at SankofaSummerSchool. Now, Dr. Molefi Asante developed Afrocentricity as a theoretical framework in the 1980s. Since then, brilliant scholars have expanded on the Afrocentric paradigm, giving us a template to guide our educational praxis. Simply, being Afrocentric means centering our Africana people in their own narratives and making them the subjects, not the objects of other people's stories. For most of us, our learning experiences have been primarily Eurocentric. We learn that our European ways of knowing and being are the best and universally applicable. The Afrocentricity challenges this notion of European white supremacy and encourages us to center ourselves as Africana people first and foremost. We take this approach because it is empowering and it is the truth. That being said, we're going to go ahead and move on in. So the first part that I like to address this and kind of break this into is talking about it in acts. Everything in life is broken up to me in these very distinctive ways, but I think often we focus on things as being less theatric, you can say, kind of less artistic, less fluid, and we look at them as this is exactly this year to this year. But to me, breaking this up into acts makes it a lot more easy to really digest that this has been a multi-part process to what we are currently seeing when it comes to the treatment of the Congolese people. So Act 1 is where we really begin to dive into not only the various aspects of what set up what we're currently seeing whenever it comes to the harm happening to the Congolese people, but the different ways in which they were being subjugated and set up for what comes next. Now, often, and let me skip to the next slide actually, because I know some people are going to be like, you know, when we talk about this Berlin West Africa Conference, the Berlin West Africa Conference actually was not the initiation of the conversations from Belgium on how to take over Congo. It actually started in 1876 with the Brussels Geographical Conference. And this was organized by King Leopold II. It ended up not only being kind of an initiation to the scramble for Africa, but the scramble for Africa really started around the 1850s. And what that is whenever European powers started to realize that Africa was full of all these different resources, but also was racialized after we were talking about slavery and the introduction of all these different things. So they decided to start looking for a place not only for the natural resources, but a place that they could intentionally cause harm to and intentionally exploit. And so the Brussels Geographical Conference was preface to the conference that followed afterwards, because what this did was it got the rest of the European powers that were invited in the mindset of being able to look at African countries as if they were products. It helped push that knowledge further, and it helped to begin to solidify as a part of Belgium's initial processes. Now, on the left, this is a letter that it took me so long to find. For some reason, it's just not available in a lot of regular discourse. And just a little aside very quickly, the slides are not what I would want them to be today. We've been traveling, and so I don't have some of the extra graphics I would have on here, but I will have these available online for free. You'll be able to get them through the Sankofa Summer School website or through all my own information, and I'll have additional kind of little explainers. Now, back to this. So this is an invitation that was sent out by King Leopold, and this shows you not only how I try not to speak in a way that's inappropriate, but how diabolical, quite frankly, the aspects were leading up into the conference. Because at the beginning, this is not written in English, but at the beginning, he kind of starts to address the fact that he's inviting certain powers to be a part of the substantial conversation of saving Africa. And the symbol on the right is one of the invitations that was included whenever this got sent out to everybody. Now, Afterwards, like we just talked about, the Berlin West Africa Conference really allowed not only for King Leopold to be set up to take over Belgium, but it made it to where he did it with the entire approval of the Belgian government. And often whenever we talk about Congo, a lot of the people that are still currently in power in Belgium will say, King Leopold acted on his own. He did something that we didn't approve of. He just was doing things that were evil. We told him not to do it. The Berlin West Africa Conference contradicts every single part of that notion, because it was a conference that was very literally saying, hey, we view this country as being a financial strain while we're trying to take it over. We don't really want to deal with it. And so King Leopold said, hey, I have an idea that I can kind of be in control of this and you all don't have to worry about it. And I'll do it with your good graces, because I am going to make sure that the savages, and again, this was terminology that was frequently used, but make sure that the savages, the people that were involved in this, are being dealt with and made to be, subservient and made to be domesticated, just a lot of these things. And that's really important context talking about the rest of this. Now, this is one of the most famous political cartoons that you will ever see when talking about Belgium. And on the left, this is an image of King Leopold and some of the other leaders cutting up what could be described as a cake, a pie, and carving up Africa. On the right is a similar piece which talks about the loving cup. And it is basically looking at how they are calling an entire country, not even just the continent, but especially when we're talking about Congo, a country, something that's a liquid that could be shared. And that's, again, really important context. Political cartoons are a very essential part in every single historical aspect that we look at. They often get viewed as just silly art, but art is revolutionary, art is political, and it gives us a really good understanding not only of how these people and these instances were viewed in the time period, so not even when it comes to our perceptions, but the ways in which that messaging was shared. Now, in 1885, this is whenever Leopold officially gained ownership of Congo. This is whenever it became from being something that was going to be colonized, from being a colonial property, to being privately owned by King Leopold II. And again, this was done with the full approval of the country of Belgium. This image that I have right here is, and again, just a preface for some people, there are a lot of images that are going to be very physically painful to look at. So if you want to just listen, feel free to do that. You're still going to get the information. But this image specifically shows how they try to make some of the people in the initial time periods of whenever King Leopold first took over punish each other. And they would have the Congolese people beat each other in a public square to make sure that they all saw that they were being mistreated by their own. Now, this did not take hold, which is why later on you'll see that they begin to really just hold on to the idea that they are going to cause them some type of harm to make them feel domesticated, to do whatever they need to do in that aspect. But this was at the initial creation of all of that. Now, the reason why the Congolese people were subject to everything they were subject to wasn't just because they were an African country. It's because Congo has some of the richest minerals in the entire world. Congo very literally has some of the purest of everything that has ever been found, especially whenever you look at the cycles of usage when it comes to materials and minerals from Western powers. The initial reason why King Leopold II also found Congo really valuable, just aside from a personal self-fulfilling prophecy standpoint, is the fact that there was rubber everywhere on the island. Now, rubber became very popular kind of in the 1870s, but it wasn't until 1892 with the invention of the bicycle, a bicycle that actually could be used by everybody, and the obsession and love that developed out of the freedom that women could get from riding a bicycle that wasn't just a unicycle. That boom required for people to have more rubber, and rubber was readily available in different parts of Congo. And with Congo, again, now beginning to be underneath this personal full ownership, King Leopold realized that it would be very beneficial to hop in on the market by having a free source of labor, which goes back to everything we always talk about slavery, but having a free source of labor that could supply exactly what he needed and use this opportunity for this boom to become very, very, very financially successful. King Leopold's financial interests kind of varied. They weren't just rubber mining, but the rubber mining was really important because it was the initial ways that we saw him contributing to this pain. On the right is another political cartoon, and apologies if my chair is shaking. On the right is another political cartoon, and this one is probably the most famous that you'll ever see whenever anybody talks about Congo. It is what is portrayed to be a snake curling up against a Congolese, alongside a Congolese person and on them. And the face of the snake is King Leopold, and his crown is on, his face is angry. And if you look to the side, you'll see that there is a woman who actually is holding her child and running away. And if you also look underneath, the way that the tail spins and goes around the man's leg looks like it almost is like multiple snakes. So this was said to have multiple different levels when it comes to understanding how important it was, because of the fact that it's not just a snake like wrapping somebody up. It's a snake that is so encompassing. It's a snake that is different parts, and it's a snake that looks like it has so many different facets because King Leopold did. Now, King Leopold had his own company because, of course, whenever you're going to do all of this to a group, you have to have your own company to make sure that you can actually successfully implement this and make sure you can benefit from it. And that is called the Abier Company, the Abier Congo Company. And it stood for the Anglo-Belgian India Rubber Company that was under the ownership of King Leopold II. This is one of their little labels that they would have. And it's really, again, important because whenever you look into it, you'll see that there are these little like decorations, these little drawings on it that are different Congolese symbols. So not only just being a company, but having an embodiment of, viewing the people again as something that is something you can put on a postcard and something you can put on your advertisement. Now, one of the biggest things that I think people know whenever it comes to Congo, at least it's something that's been widely shared, something that's readily known compared to everything else, is the fact that hands were viewed as currency. The removal of hands became an incentive to staff and a method of punishment towards the Congolese miners. So what would happen whenever he couldn't get the Congolese people to turn on one another is he would have people cut off the staff. He would have people cut off the hands of some of the Congolese miners who didn't work fast enough or hard enough. And he would take pictures and boast around about having them have less hands. Now, we understand the irony of this because not having a hand is not going to make you mine faster, but it was used as a scare tactic. And part of the reason why also it was really popular at the time period, not just for King Leopold, but also the rest of the staff that were in Congo, was because of the fact that if they used bullets, he would say that they had to match the amount of bullets with hands. And so instead of using bullets, they would just cut off hands. You could lose your hand or your foot for anything. And these pictures became a regular occurrence because of the fact, we'll talk a little bit later, of a white woman who was there who made sure to document everything and take pictures of everything that was happening to the Congolese people, but also King Leopold and his staff liked having these pictures. It made them feel empowered. In the picture on the top left, you'll see that both of these men have their hands, but they're holding the hands of other people. Now, in 1908, Belgium took control of Congo. So they made sure in the midst of all the international outrage that was happening that they took it back underneath their control. This is a picture of them actually putting Congolese people into the Belgian army and have them, try and use them as the force that people were seeing when dealing with everything that was going on. Of course, this only, again, happened because of international outrage. And we'll talk about that a little bit more because it's really important to look at any activism standpoint, especially the history of Congo, and the reason why the Belgian government has so much of a responsibility when it comes to everything that has happened to Congo in the last 150 years because of the outrage that was required for them to just treat them as human beings. Now, this was a really important part to include here. And I want to preface this by saying that we have to be very cautious when talking about any of the conversations surrounding race, racism, the liberation of a people, and white figures. When you look up any information on Congo, almost all of the authors you are going to see are white authors. Almost every single one. And unfortunately, there are really important nuances to understand as to why it doesn't really work for a white author or a white person to be looked at as the pinnacle of saviorism for anybody. But with that being said, there's a woman who was a major part in Congo being able to have the international reach that they were able to have, and her name is Alice Seeley Harris, and she's right there in the middle. Now, again, Alice Celia Harris, started off as being a Puritanist, somebody who wanted to come and, like, again, teach the savages, was her own quote. And when she got to Congo, she realized how disgusting and terrible everything was. And while she still, again, maintained a certain level of ideology in terms of thinking that these people deserve to be treated like humans, but were still people that needed to be colonized, despite all of that, her pictures are the reason why we have a lot of the visuals from Congo that we have today. Almost all the pictures you've seen are pictures she took, because the Congolese people were not allowed to have any access to anything other than some food, a house, occasionally clothing, which they would take away sometimes, and the ability to do their work. And her and one of her co-conspirators in trying to make sure that the international world was able to see this were both white people. But again, I like to make sure that that's a really important part of what we talk about, because African countries were consistently ready to stand up for Congo. They just did not necessarily have the resources to get into Congo because of how heavily wrapped up King Leopold and his army kept things. The only reason why Alice and some of the other folks were let in was because they were looked at as these religious fanaticals and these figures that could help bring sense. And again, that's something that she wrote herself, bring sense into Congo. This picture is probably one of the most famous pictures when it came to the international outrage that happened. The man in the picture is sitting down, and what he's looking at are a hand and then a foot of his daughter. He that day was told he did not meet his rubber quota enough, and when he was told he didn't meet his rubber quota, the decision that they took was either, number one, like cut his hand off, or number two, cut the hand and foot off of his child. And even though they cut the hand and foot off of his child and handed it to them, they still decided to eat his child and his wife. Cannibalism and the Belgian consumption of bodies specifically was very popular during this time period, and they would cannibalize somebody even after having the action or punishment taken that was supposed to help incentivize them to work better. Now, when Alice saw this man holding a hand and a foot, she asked him to sit down and take a picture because she wanted to document what was going on, and this picture sparked the most international outrage of anything else that happened before, and was one of the biggest triggers in making sure that Congo was a little bit closer towards freedom. Again, being back underneath Belgian rule was not freedom, but it was somewhat less harsh than being underneath King Leopold II's leadership. And because of that general progress, they were able to get completely free in 1960. But first, back to this. So Act 2 is really important, because when we talk about Act 2, we talk about dispossession. And the dispossession of something is not only, it's not just ownership. It's of having something, viewing it as property, viewing it as chattel, like when we talk about slavery in different aspects and the Atlantic slave trade, but it's depriving that thing that you own as well. And dispossession is what we saw happen after Belgium took back control of Congo. So in 1909, and I showed you guys this picture before, but I wanted to bring it back. After Belgium decided to take Congo back, they decided to not only keep a lot of the practices and the mines that were currently up, but to further them by getting engaged in World War II and other things, so on and so forth. At the time period in the 1830s, Belgium and the United States had said publicly that they were like best friends, is the best way to describe it. They said they were more than allies, that they were brothers. They said that they were going to consistently help one another. And so when Belgium saw, okay, King Leopold may have done things that we publicly don't want to, we don't want to be associated with, he already set up Congo as being very financially beneficial for us to step into and use that to help our allies and to build our own forms of financial gain. Katanga mine is it's not one of the most famous mines, but it's really important for understanding how quickly Belgium hopped into utilizing the mines that were available, because by this time period, by probably like 1906, the rubber trade had kind of shifted and there was a move towards using synthetic rubber. So having rubber that was mined from the trees that they were mined from wasn't nearly as useful as it would be, but copper became very popular at the same time. And the practices that they used in order to mine rubber, whenever it comes to taking the product, like just regular assembly lines almost in that type of mindset, they already had those mindsets in place. And so it's easy for them to step in and do this. Copper mining was a huge deal, and it did not look as evil. I think there's a quote from Prince Albert I, where he said that it was useful, and I wish I had this up, but that it was useful and that it was less evil to use the Congolese people to help contribute to the ongoing copper mines. And the Katanga mine was a really good example of the way that they were able to kind of hide it, because if you look on the right, this is a picture that was used on postcards. So again, postcards that were intentionally produced by the Belgian government and by Belgian companies, showing how cool the mine was, kind of making it very cutesy, like adding this, aesthetic to it that made it look like they were just there, like working, but also able to stop and have fun, dancing around in all white. Whereas we know that is not how mining works in any way, shape, or form. Even mining at its most economical level, when it comes to the economic advancement of the people that are doing the mining, is still hard, and it still causes a lot of physical, psychological, and environmental damage. Now, one of the biggest mines that still causes problems to the people of Congo today is the Shinkolobwe mine. And the Shinkolobwe mine was from uranium. There is an exact quote that came from the United States government that they released, saying that the Shinkolobwe mine was essential to winning World War II because it produced the most pure uranium that they had ever seen anywhere on the entire globe. The uranium was so rare to find in this level of purity that as soon as it was found in Congo, publicly, they actually decided to say that Congo was not mining any uranium, and they hid where the uranium came from in order to be used in the atomic bombs that exist. If you look at the picture on the left, that is the Shinkolobwe mine just in one part, and it started off so much higher. The ground had like different levels of mountains, and by the middle of the mining, not even by the end, there were so many caverns that the ground was unstable. And again, uranium is not something that's stable. Uranium is not something that you're going to have in your household, just to use something casually. This is something that is an essential part of building an atomic bomb. So by proxy, the Congolese people ended up becoming victims to the Manhattan Project similarly. Now, on the left is a really great graphic that shows the different ways that Shinkolobwe kind of operated. It also uses the visual graphics that you'll see. And if you can zoom in on your own screens, you can zoom in and see. It showed how the Shinkolobwe mine directly helped build certain aspects of the United States, how it helped like fuel different things across the world, and what everything from the mine was used for. It was used for boating. It was used for all these different things. And it really kind of made the United States, the Shinkolobwe mine built the United States. I think that's the best way to describe it, because again, without World War II and the results of World War II, the United States would not continue to be the Western power that it currently is. On the right, again, is another picture of the Shinkolobwe mine. And this is an area that had become so deforested that they had to move the people's houses down to an easier level to access because they could not travel back and forth in the same way. Now, Hiroshima and Nagasaki are where the atomic bombs were dropped. And it's a very necessary connection to make an understanding that the degradation of the Congolese people was also used to help degrade and kill the Japanese people. These were very much interconnected, because on the right, you have a picture of somebody mining. You have a picture of somebody that's being forced to mine and that's being forced to work in this area that is harmful to their body, their minds. But then you look on the left and you see the devastation that's happening. And so these are two different types of devastation that are interconnected forever. There's also a really important document, and I'll have this as well available for people, that talks about, on the left is the CIA's document, and it talks about what Congo is useful for. They even have in there how happy they were to have access to the uranium, how they publicly denied the uranium coming from the Shinkolobwe and coming from Congo at all. Most people did not know where the uranium came from until later, maybe in the 1990s, and that was only in certain circles of people that really were already aware of some of the issues going on in Congo. Even just in 2019, and that's the picture on the right, you can see from Google Earth that there are still mining shafts, there are still holes that have been unsealed in Congo from the Shinkolobwe mine, and so uranium has been leaking into the surface and to the open environment around. Now, 1960, the fight for independence. There was always a fight for independence in the Congolese people, but this image right here is an image of Patrice Lumumba. And if you know anything about Congo, even if you don't, you've probably heard the name Patrice Lumumba quite a few times, because he was one of the biggest saviors of Congo. He came along and gave the Congolese people so much love just on like an actual political level, which we don't typically see when it comes to politicians and people that are these types of public figures. But he gave them hope. He gave them like fight. And it's one of those things where Patrice Lumumba, to me, even being somebody who passed away so young, is one of the single most, I think, important figures when we talk about any terms and any aspect of African history, especially when we're talking about Afrocentricity. Thank you for sending that in the chat, Dr. Taylor. So when we move on to Act 3, this is kind of like the final act of the Western invasion of the systematic racism being used towards the Congolese people. And this is still in action today. We call this the Evasion Act because it's not only whenever they decided to move out of Congo, but it's whenever they chose to use very, very, very in-depth evasive tactics that are documented and published in order to avoid being held accountable for any of what they did in Congo. And just in general, avoid outrage because, as we know, social currency is power. Social currency matters a lot on a political level, on a level of diplomacy. So they did this. And in this picture, there is Prince Albert, and he was one of the people who often gets like lauded as being pro Congo, pro anti-slavery, like all of these other things. But he was one of the people who directly contributed to Patrice Lumumba's death and worked in tandem with the United States to do that. And I always like to make sure that people see this face because we typically only see him whenever he was older in this picture, this pose with like this crown on, this and that. But this was the age when he decided to start actively engaging in some of the most harmful tactics. And it's important to be able to see this face and recognize it. And then behind him, we have a picture of Patrice Lumumba that, again, is one of my favorites. And it's whenever he was elected, just like this beautiful, shining moment. Even if it didn't last as long, the impact of that moment has lasted forever and will continue to last forever. Let me go to the next slide. Now, Patrice Lumumba was murdered in 1961 after the election where he was chosen by the Congolese people in tandem with some other wonderful leaders, like just completely across the board, people came out to vote. And this was the first time the Congolese people were able to ever have an election. And for them to show up and engage in democracy on this heavy of a level was unheard of. People did not expect this to happen in a place that had been dealing heavily with colonization so long, but they did it. They elected Patrice Lumumba. Patrice Lumumba was then murdered by the United States and Belgium. And actually, oddly enough, it was the Russian government that helped show some of what had happened to Patrice Lumumba. I myself don't even necessarily know all the different dynamics of this because it's hard to find translated materials that really talk about what was going on then. But Russian people were furious that Patrice Lumumba was killed. And you can see the newspaper on the left. Their newspapers did a really great job at sharing some of the information that was happening and letting people know that it was not a random riot. It was not this small internal issue that created this. It was a very intentional murder by Western powers. Now, in 1950, and realistically, we don't have the exact date of whenever the US government began to intervene with Belgium and with the Congolese people, because like I said before, in 1832 was the exact year that the United States publicly announced that they were going to be partnered with Belgium. But before that, they had already been kind of engaging and looking at working together with one another. We do know, however, that in 1950, in the 1950s, there was a definitive action taken by the United States to start engaging in the Congolese people on their own level. Now, prior to this, again, 1900s, like when we're talking about like 1912 to all through World War I and World War II, they had been dealing with Congo through Belgium. So they weren't directly involved, but they were using the Belgian government to help cover and provide them all those materials like the uranium. But back to this. So between 1950 and the 1970s is whenever we saw the extension of U.S. covert operations. Now, while we're still talking about the 1960s currently, it's really important to note that in the 1950s, the CIA began their own programs to implement different like sleeper agents in every aspect of Congolese society, so that while they were continuing to build towards finally getting that type of freedom, but towards finally becoming their own independent country, that they would have people ready to be in place. And even though JFK in a lot of circles, especially even, or at least in my experience, progressive circles, can be viewed as kind of like the kindest president of this era, JFK knew very deliberately that Patrice Lumumba was going to be a target and did not engage with it at all. And the person on his right was also a part of having like these different conversations and making sure that Patrice Lumumba would not be able to be the leader that he was posed to be. They also didn't think that the Congolese people would engage in like any type of democratic process. They didn't expect it to happen, because whenever the Congolese people got their freedom in 1960, there were no doctors, no lawyers, nobody on the type of level that could help actually continue that process that was of Congolese descent. Yes, they sure didn't, because they made it illegal for Congolese people to learn to read and write unless it was in relation to mining. They made it illegal for Congolese people to go to school. The only types of education that Congolese people were able to get was through a type of religious program, whether it was through certain different types of Protestants, whether it was through like all the different groups that were engaged and were both a part of the liberation and a part of the continued exploitation of the Congolese people. So they didn't have the opportunity to even become lawyers and doctors. So out of the 5,000 staff that were a part of the Belgian government's takeover of Congo in 1960, whenever they got their freedom, only three to five, and that's even debated, were Congolese people. So imagine 4,997 people pulling out of a government sphere, and all of those people were a part of your harm, and you don't have anybody able to replace it. And a lot of that also came from the US's covert operations, because if somebody looked like they were going to start becoming more educated on a level that was not going to be able to be controlled by the Belgian government education of the Congolese people, they would make sure to remove them or to have them punished, or in general just take away the access that they could. And it was an intentional effort through the United States, because they were afraid of losing their access to, again, the purest minerals that exist in the entire world. Because again, it was the United States that released multiple like reports saying how much they loved and appreciated the minerals that came out of Congo. And in 1970, or at least they say in 1968, the CIA officially ended their operations in Congo. Of course, that's not accurate, but that's what is on their publicly written reports, which is why I list this as 1970, because they said that they were going to leave in 1965, but it really wasn't until 1968 that there was actually a confirmation, and that confirmation also was not accurate, as we found in the last documents that have been released by the CIA and in general by the State Department over the last 25 years. So in 2000, a lot of people have talked about coltan and tantalum, which are a part of what powers our devices. So whenever you look at like an iPhone, for example, this material that is used to keep this battery like functioning, or even in a portable battery pack, comes from a mineral. Everything comes from minerals, but sometimes we don't really understand how rare it is to find certain kinds of minerals. So tantalum is an element. It's a very specific type of metal. When it's exposed to the air, it has a really great oxide film that's highly resistant to corrosion. It is highly resistant to heat. It's non-reactive. And the reason why that's important is because it's a really big part of all of our technological devices. Coltan is a refined, coltan becomes heat resistant powder, and it becomes metallic tantalum after it's been mined, which is why coltan is mined and it becomes tantalum, and they're kind of like interconnected. I'm sure there are people that could give like a much better lesson on that when it comes to like the different chemical aspects of it. But it's important to understand. In 2000, we had the micro, I don't want to say micro, but we had like these small levels of specialized cell phones that were coming out to different groups of people. So even though cell phones were becoming very popular, obviously at the time, specialized cell phones had been tested for the last few years before to smaller groups of people. And they were able to go through the process of deciding what would be the best before it was massively released. And so the coltan industry wasn't even necessarily popular before this. And it became popular because of that insider information and the testing that existed before it became a part of every single cell phone. They're always running jokes that, a Nokia phone is unbreakable, that these different types of phones are unbreakable. And some of them use heavy types of coltan. And so they weren't able to be as small and as usable as the phones that we have today. And so the mining has come more pervasive as we have continued to become a more technological society. Now, in 2000, there was a boom because of this, because of the way we were getting access to everything. And if you look in this picture that's right here, the mountains that you see behind you are not only full of some of the dirt and some of the minerals that they've sifted through, too, but they are also like some of the chemicals that are coming from mining the coltan that the people are breathing in. If you can imagine these types of mounds being everywhere, and again, pictures are so important because they give us this direct, like unquestionable visual insight into something. And pictures weren't even really allowed to be taken in the 2000s either, so we don't have a whole lot of them like we should. This picture was so important to me because if you look, you can also see the people working. You can see like these like people that are out in the sun without protection, whereas the military that are there watching in the back, very small, are able to have full sun protection. It's just one of those things that is really important. All of this is important, but that to me is also very important. Now, I I had to call this crocodile tears because I didn't have another way to say it. In 2020, there was a obviously like international rise in consciousness, or at least in perceived consciousness, with the Black Lives Matter riots that were happening in the United States and other riots that were happening across the country at the same time that were able to be bolstered and uplifted through the Black Lives Matter riots and protests that were happening in the United States. So people started realizing how much Belgium owed for everything that was happening. Now, if you mentally review everything we've kind of talked about for a second and understand this country for the last 135 years was very intentionally destabilized. They were not allowed to have doctors. They were not allowed to engage in any other type of economic industry. They were forced to continually mine over and over and over again, whether or not the mining, whatever they were mining for, shifted and changed, because they were forced by the government and by government agencies, especially more than anybody else, Belgium, to be engaged in this. And so when your entire economy is based around being terrorized to mine for something, when your entire economy is based on having your purest forms of elements stolen and used for European gain, you are not going to have the opportunity as a country to really build, because your entire existence, your entire economy is based around this one thing. And again, every single time the Congolese people have tried to get some semblance of freedom, it is very, very severely attacked, and if not, almost entirely destroyed by European powers. It is very, very, very intentionally attacked and minimized and utilized to harm other groups of people. So I feel like it's really important for context to understand that this is not some random occurrence of Belgium getting a little bit of an accountability call starting in 2020. This is recognizing that the Belgian government still has some of those companies that existed today that function to help build their economy. They still have taken almost no responsibility for anything that's happened, and they still are building off of the elements that exist in Congo, because they still have been able to blackmail certain Congolese government officials to make sure that they can keep mining. And so that's why when I talk about Congo, and I wish I had more time to go just off into the 1960s, but I think the context building is more important than anything else, because some people know something about, Patrice Lumumba and the liberation of that era, but not enough people know about the mining that happened prior to this. So that's what I spend the most time focusing on. But it's really important to look at why this exists. So I call this section crocodile tears. I don't have a better way to academically explain it, because I think that is the most accurate part. Now I'm going to stop and answer this question really quickly. Nikki said, I'm curious about the testing process of various minerals and organic material found in Congo and other African countries. Obviously, the process is really amazing. I'll see if I can link a video so that people are able to learn a little bit more about that. But the testing process, it really depends on what level of mineral you're looking for. Just going off like a little educational rant really quickly. Minerals all have different aspects. So when we talk about silver, a lot of people are used to hearing the term sterling silver and 925 sterling silver. And 925 sterling silver is considered to be like one of the best, purest forms of sterling silver, whereas we have regular silver down here. And so different types of silver that go from like 0 to 925 all have different purposes, and they'll show different levels of the metal in the way that they are tested. And so that works the same way for uranium and these other things. And uranium at its purest form existed in Congo, same way with copper and a couple different other elements. So yes. So anyways, back to this. the Belgian government got a little bit of heat in 2020 when people realized the reason why Congo is one of the poorest countries in the world, despite having the best, most purest resources, is because of the way that the Belgian government has continually harmed them. But the Belgian prime minister, as well as one of the Belgian princes, decided to say that they were sorry it happened, but that they weren't sorry for doing it. In 2021, there was a bigger set of riots that happened in Congo against the continued harm of the Belgian government, and especially in the wake of those false apologies, the empty apologies that came out of 2020. We saw these heavy, like really beautiful, important, different riots and other forms for pushing for democracy that occurred to try and use the what do we call it? It's not just using like the power that came out of 2020, but it's really riding the wave of discomfort that came out of 2020. 2020 was a very good year in some aspects for getting people to deal with all the ways that being uncomfortable can be useful, but obviously some of that died out. This picture is a really like beautiful moment of people in the streets, like all communicating, all gathering from that 2021 time period, really just like together and pushing and fighting. And unfortunately, shortly after in 2022, a new refugee crisis came to light. But with that being said, an international eye has come. And so in the last couple of years, all of this is where you start to hear the phrase Congo is bleeding coming from, because of the 2020 apologies and then the 2021 riots moving into a new refugee crisis that got ignited because of the ways that some different government sleeper agents and other government agencies decided to go back and start inserting themselves to retaliate against that was building. Now, what's next? When we talk about Congo, no country, no anything can be talked of in such a short time period in a way that is entirely thorough. But what I teach for, the reason why any of this to me is really important and to anything that we're doing, is looking at what comes next. And what comes next is the continued conversations around Congo, but also refocusing the conversation from just the aspect of Congo is bleeding to who caused the blood. Anytime I see somebody comment the phrase Congo is bleeding, I always tell them like the knife is still in and it's the Belgian government holding it, because there have been no formal reparations paid out in any way, shape, or form to the Congolese people at all. Like we're talking like 0%. There have been no reparations paid out to other countries that are also African countries that got harmed trying to help protect the Congolese people. Nothing has been financially done substantially or even on a false level. The best that they have gotten is a surface level apology from a government official because of pressures in 2020. And I think another apology came in 2022 and another apology came in 2023. So when I say what's next, all I want for people to take from this more than anything else is understanding that there is more to happen from this and looking at what came from all this and what's going to continue to come. I'm going to pause here because if there are any questions, I would love to take them. Or I don't know if there are any other things. I don't know how you want to do this, like last little bit, Dr. Taylor. I also have my little here.
It's totally fine. Hold on. Let me get your stuff up here. Wait, hold on. Not me. I don't want that. There we go. So yes, so definitely if anybody has any questions, leave them in the chat. Also, if you're watching this after the fact, you can also leave questions and we will periodically check in. And, if something comes up, I will ping our wonderful, wonderful instructor, Abiola, to, and say, hey, somebody had a question on it or whatever. That's generally how this is going to go. We're testing this new platform out. So I really, really appreciate it. I was sitting here like, I thought I knew a lot. And I obviously did not. But that's the beauty of Sankofa Summer School. We cannot thank you enough. She does have her Cash App up there, her PayPal. You can pause right now and scan it so you can throw some coins to her way. Like she really, did this for our class, and we are just so honored. Abiola, I thank you personally from the bottom of my heart for giving us such a dynamic presentation. So yeah, if anybody ends up having questions, you follow her. Please follow them on Instagram and TikTok, because that's where the knowledge is being created and it's happening and it's being shared. And like us at Sankofa Summer School, Abiola really believes in like disrupting these institutions that try to gatekeep education. So please follow them and see what they're doing over there. Did you have anything else that you wanted to share with us?
No, just like I said prior, guys, I try and keep resources free everywhere I can. So the little beacons thing over the picture of me over my head, I'll upload this slideshow once I can again go back and add. I have like little notes I like to do on things so that people can know what to focus on. So I'll add this slideshow and a link to this that'll stay on there for free so that you guys can easily like see them and have access to the slides if you want to teach this on your own. Because like Dr. Taylor said, it's really important. And so I'm grateful to be able to do this. Thank you, Dr. Taylor, for having me. This was like the coolest thing ever. Whenever you emailed back and were like, yes, you can do it, I was like, ah, it's like ready to scream. So that's all I have to add. And thank you for the Sankofa Summer School program, because I haven't been able to make a couple of the classes because I've had like we've had car troubles and we've been traveling, but the presentations that I've been able to like catch a little bit after have been amazing. So make sure you all tune in for the ones tomorrow. I think you're going tomorrow, right? It's yours.
I am going tomorrow.
Yes. So it'll be Dr. Taylor's tomorrow.
Oh, wait, we have a question. We do have a question in the chat. Do you have any thoughts on Cobalt Red? I have it in my queue, but I haven't read it yet. And thanks for sharing these slides. I came late. That's okay.
No, it's okay. Like it doesn't matter when you get here, you got here. I am an anti-advocate of reading books about Congo that are not written by Congolese people. It's one of my strongest things. And there's a reason why I didn't reference, I didn't have my book slide up because again, it got deleted in the internet extras that I had. But I will never tell people to read a book for the most part that's not written by the group that it's about. I would not recommend reading Cobalt Red because from what I have seen, Siddharth, what's his name? Siddharth Kara does not work with Congolese people in any type of substantial way. It's the same reason why I don't recommend the book on King Leopold that everybody is always talking about, because the man who wrote it does not bring even just Black people to any of the events he does. He doesn't bring Congolese people to the events he does. And both of these authors have made a substantial amount of money from writing these books. And there's no documented like donations. Now there is one book, and I'm going to be doing a book giveaway on my Instagram, so please stay tuned. I meant to do it in before this, but I will recommend a book if it's at least authored first and foremost by a Congolese person, and the other group that's participating is backing it up. And when I first saw this book, so Ryan Reynolds, this is called Congo Stories, or not Ryan Reynolds, Ryan Gosling took the pictures for this book. And when I first saw it, it made me want to immediately get rid of it, and that was childish. But all he did was take the pictures for this book. This book is called Congo Stories. It's written by John Prendergast, but it's mainly written by Fidel Bafalemba, and he actually does interviews of his own people in the city that he's from in Congo. It's a beautiful, beautiful like book that includes pictures and everything else. And this is one of the resources that I recommend because the funds are predominantly going to a Congolese person who does work in their communities. So hopefully that was not too much information, but yes, always Google the author. If you Google anything about the word Congo and you see the author pop up, Google them, see where they're from, because they're also, just a little aside, there are a lot of Belgian descendants of some of these people that have written books and again have made like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars off of the book talking about the trauma that their ancestors caused. And there's almost no traceable accountability or traceable like funds that have been given to the people that they're writing about. And it's again like something that I stand on a lot, because there's no reason to be writing in fully financially benefiting and living off of talking about somebody else's pain if you are at the very least not going to include them and their faces in telling those stories. And even then, I'm not Congolese, so that's why I always try to refer you guys back to this, because I am Nigerian American, but this is not even my personal like ancestors history. My ancestors are a part of this because we're all interconnected, especially again that part of Afrocentricity, but like I'm not even like a Congolese person, and that's always an important thing to keep. So I hope that answered your question.
I thought that was a pretty great response. Thank you very much. And we got some recommendations on, how we should navigate that. And I appreciate you for saying that, because it's super important in an Afrocentric academy that we emphasize that the learning can always come from the people. We center the people. We do not, immediately just trust what observers and outsiders have to say about people. We want to hear their experiences. So thank you once again. Abiola, you have been amazing. Take care. I'm going to just speak to the people real quick. Thank you all for tuning in to Sankofa Summer School. We are, a grassroots kind of situation going on. We are independently funded, and that is because we do a lot of fundraising and a lot of grassroots asks. So if you enjoyed this and want to donate to support the school, you can go to SankofaSummerSchool.com/donate and make a direct donation. Abiola also had their information up if you wanted to send a direct donation to them. That is perfect. Please go to SankofaSummerSchool.com and learn more about what it is that we do every summer. Learn more about the remaining classes we have. We have 4 more classes. So check us out for this 2024 session, and we look forward to having you with us. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Take care.